Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna, and I am a wellness advocate, a grad school student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. I am a very active person, although I had a late dinner last night, so I'm kind of feeling like a slug today. So we'll see what kind of workout I end up with. Good morning, Miss Carla. And I started Wellness Wednesday because I had on my heart to share my lifelong journey with anxiety and depression, because I find that just like in a peer support group, sharing tips and experiences really helps other people to find their way, and sometimes me as well if I'm stuck in a certain area. So Wellness Wednesday is a great time for you to get on here and chat, give tips, comments on whatever I'm talking about. Good morning, Mary Jane. And just kind of share information. And then, of course, if you find it helpful and you think it will help someone else, then I encourage you to share the video. The video is always here to watch, so if you only catch part of it and have to come back to it later, it sits right here on my profile page, or you can find it under my videos tab. So a few weeks ago, I decided it would be fun to do a movie series. There's a church in Illinois that I followed for a while that did biblical messages from Christmas movies, and I thought, well, why not wellness messages too? I felt confident that because of the type of study I'm doing, I have a tendency to look for wellness messages anyway. I felt confident that I could find those in some Christmas movies. And so last week we learned a little bit from How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And today I'm going to talk about A Christmas Carol, sort of. And I'll explain that in a minute. Ironically, in my group today, I found I usually try to post something funny in the mornings unless we're doing a challenge in my VIP group. And this morning, I just happened to find a meme about the ghosts of Christmas, but in the terms of Christmas movie theme songs that are kind of like earworms that stick in your head. It was just kind of funny to me that today was the day that I found that. Good morning, Danielle, when we're going to be talking about A Christmas Carol, because it was like the three ghosts of Christmas past, but I think it was Charlie Brown and the Grinch, and I can't remember who else. And it was something like the ghosts of Christmas songs. So if any of those, for my VIPs, if any of those got stuck in your head as an earworm, you're welcome. Maybe. Either that or you'll be hunting me down later. Okay, so believe it or not, so I said we're going to talk about A Christmas Carol, sort of. And we're going to talk about the Christmas Carol concept based on the novel by Charles Dickens. But believe it or not, in my research, I found that there are probably at least 100 versions of film, TV, and video game adaptations of A Christmas Carol. And I actually found a couple of websites that rate them, and the ratings are a little bit different, of course, but the funny thing was, good morning, Miss Anne. The funny thing was that the Muppet Christmas Carol, which I've never seen, I know I'm an 80s girl, that seems sacrilegious, but A Muppet Christmas Carol was actually very highly rated in most, if not all of them. So I'm probably going to have to sit down and watch that at some point, but as a grad student, I have limited time, and I knew I wanted to deal with this. And there's been a couple of different versions of this movie or this Christmas Carol concept. And last year I watched one of them several times, actually. It was fairly new. And so this year I had to choose from one of those movies on the list, and I chose Scrooged because 80s and because I'd never actually seen the whole thing. I know. Listen, I grew up with no cable or VCR. My stepfather would rent a VCR about once every 2 months. So don't judge me for not having seen some of these very well-known movies. So, the fact that there are at least 100 versions of film, TV, and video game adaptations of A Christmas Carol tells me that there's more than one that are worth watching, right? So, I watched a movie called Spirited several times last year, which was a Apple TV original that was released last year. And then I actually saw Scrooged with Bill Murray for the first time this week. So let's dig into A Christmas Carol and its concept. Yes, it's a little chilly this morning, isn't it, Anne? Let's dig into A Christmas Carol and the concept. And of course, these are just things that I have picked up. If you have other things that you've picked up from having seen one of these movies, feel free to share. If you have a favorite version of a Christmas Carol or a remake, adaptation, whatever, please feel free to drop it in the comments, because I would still like to see one that's a little closer to the book, that's a little more original. And I haven't picked which one that's going to be yet, because again, there are several. So, but we all kind of know the story of A Christmas Carol. Ebenezer Scrooge is our original guy, right? And the basic premise of the movie is that all human beings have the opportunity to choose to behave in kinder ways toward each other. Now, this movie was written, the book was written years and years and years ago. I'm not going to do the math, could be we know it's decades, possibly longer than that. And it was Christian based. And I'm not going to dig into that too much, because I usually try to stay kind of away from anything that's specific to a religion, or anything that's political related. But the story was Christian based, and it was based on the fact that it's not enough to not sin, but you must make an effort to help others every day. Which I think is a fabulous message, more on the end of making an effort to help others every day, because I think that's where we find joy and gratitude that we didn't expect. So now in the story of Scrooged, we have Frank Cross. This is a total 80s comedy version of A Christmas Carol. Bill Murray is the 80s version of Scrooge, and his character is Frank Cross. He's pretty sleazy, not in terms of anything sexual related, but just kind of, you get that sleazy car salesman vibe from him. And there's a very clear reason that he dislikes Christmas, which has to do with the loss of his girlfriend on Christmas Eve, because of his preoccupation with financial and personal success in business. But the point here on this particular one is that people often associate loss with a specific day or even the Christmas holiday, and that can make it very, very difficult for them to find any kind of personal Christmas spirit or enjoyment in the day, because what the day is supposed to mean, or what the season is supposed to mean, kind of gets lost in the losses that surround it. And that was the case with Frank Cross. Also, there's a note of childhood trauma. He was ignored. He was babysat by the TV, which I'm sure in that time was more of a political statement, because TV was a big thing. They were getting bigger, and a lot of people were spending a lot of time in front of the TV. But he's just mean. I mean, he's just plain mean. He steals a cab from an old lady by telling her she dropped something. He's a television producer, and is creating this really scary, terrifying ad, almost apocalyptic type ad about the coming of the TV station's rendition of A Christmas Carol. So he's using scare tactics to convince people that they need to watch this movie about light and love and Christmas spirit, right? Which is kind of ironic. And on top of that, he actually utilizes the fact that a woman had a heart attack while watching that TV ad to promote the TV ad for the TV show further. And then, of course, the Bob Cratchit character is played by Bobcat Goldthwait, which, in all honesty, in the first part of the movie is probably the most normal I've ever seen Bobcat Goldthwait act or look, until he gets fired and spends a couple of days drinking and comes back at Frank with a shotgun. So there's a lot of hilarity here, but there's still some fantastic messages. And then the third one is, the third more specific movie is Spirited, which was, again, an Apple TV release last year. And it starred, of all people, Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell. And there was so much that I totally did not expect going into this. But the truth of the matter is this is actually not a remake per se, or an adaptation proper of A Christmas Carol, but it's more of a sequel. And we'll dig into that in a few minutes. But basically, it's told from the perspective of the ghosts. And that is more of a franchise now, as the ghost of Jacob Marley has started a business where these ghosts make it a point to try to change people, and they choose people that have a larger impact, or a larger influence, so that the impact is more widespread. So it's a very interesting take on the original concept of A Christmas Carol, but still covers a lot of the same basic themes. It's just much, much more modernized, and we'll get into that in a minute. So what is the overarching theme of all of the Christmas Carol adaptations movies? Pretty much any of them that you watch, you can find these themes. There might be a couple you won't find in the Muppet Christmas Carol, but since I haven't seen it, I can't really speak to that. Overarching themes. There is a lost love or trauma associated with those days of the year, with that season. And we kind of touched on that already. So this is what I picked up in the movies, not necessarily what the critics say or what you might find when you watch it. But again, an overall arching theme of love, loss, or trauma. Now, we visited that a little bit last week with the Grinch, right? He had some childhood trauma, a lot of bullying that sent him off onto a mountain in isolation. And that has happened here. In all of these movies, there's some kind of trauma. Now, it's not touched on as heavily in Spirited, but even the original Ebenezer, there's different adaptations dig differently into a lost love named Belle from earlier in his life. And then, of course, in Scrooged, Frank has a lost love, his girlfriend, Claire, who basically told him that they needed to spend some time apart on Christmas Eve when, again, he was becoming a little more obsessed with success and material things, which is not the lumpy, and that's what her nickname was for him, that she knew when they first met and when they first got together. So we have to remember that for people that are kind of Scroogey this time of year, that there may be some very significant reasons behind it. And oftentimes that is anxiety and depression that gets worse at Christmas time, that is kind of related to a loss or a perceived loss or some kind of childhood trauma that has become associated with that time of year. The second thing that I picked up on in all of these movies is the importance of being compassionate and kind. Probably for the same reason as we just talked about, which is that there's a lot of people, and we kind of touched on this last week as well, a lot of people that we just don't know what's going on with them around this time of year. So if we hear people say they just can't get into the spirit, the simple answer seems like, well, put up some lights and just kind of fake it till you make it. But that really doesn't always work because a lot of times there's just something else going on. So it's really important to be compassionate and kind, maybe not just at Christmas, which is what these movies focus on, but all year long. I personally, it's something I try to do all year long. And we talked about that with the Thanksgiving gratitude thing too. All of these movies, including The Grinch from last week, talk about family and relationships being more important than work and material success. All of these adaptations of A Christmas Carol, the original theme of The Christmas Carol, is that whether they're focusing on the commercialization of Christmas or obsession with buying gifts or with material success or work success, all of these movies in some way encompass a business person. All of the Christmas Carol movies and adaptations encompass a business person who has become cold, who has become focused on the material aspect or the success, the recognition success aspect of business, workaholics, if you will, who have gotten to a point where they are no longer making time for family or relationships or generosity or anything like this. And in each of these movies, you can see some sort of scene where your Bob Cratchit figure, whoever that may be in any given movie, is, even though they have virtually nothing. In Scrooged, it was his assistant, Grace, and her son, who hasn't spoken since he witnessed his father's death. But they are a large family. She lives with her mother and her, I think, 4 children. And they have virtually nothing because Frank pays a terrible salary. So she basically is the Bob Cratchit of this situation. Actually, Bob Cratchit's kind of split in Scrooge between Bobcat Goldthwait's character, Elliot, and his assistant, Grace. But we see scenes in the movie, either because the ghost of Christmas Past takes Scrooge or Frank or Clint to that person's house, or because the movie just kind of changes to that scene where, regardless of what they have, they are in the family moment and they are enjoying the time and they're enjoying the present. And that's kind of what the Ghost of Christmas Present frequently focuses on in these movies, is showing what other things look like outside of Scrooge or Frank's or Clint's perspective, to help them kind of get out of their box and see other things that are out there that are possible, that have nothing to do, or maybe everything to do, with money or lack thereof. For example, in Scrooge, since that's the one I most recently watched, there's a homeless gentleman that he meets when he goes to see his old girlfriend, Claire, who he then finds underneath the streets, frozen solid. And you can see a little bit of Frank's real personality coming out there as he realizes, and he gets mad, and he blames the frozen homeless man for not staying where Claire was, and where he could be fed and could be warm and could be safe. So family and relationships are more important than work and material success. And in this day, as much as ever before, as much as any of the portrayals in these movies, we do tend to get caught up in the day-to-day and the paycheck to paycheck, and forget to make time for our families and our relationships. So that to me was a very important message, which is a perfect precedent for the greed and selfishness. In all of these movies, the Scrooge character, regardless of what their name is, the Scrooge character is consumed with greed and selfishness to some extent, whether it's money related or success related or blocking of traumatic experiences related. They're all consumed with greed and selfishness, which leads to isolation. They learn throughout the movie that generosity and compassion actually becomes a fulfillment for them, because of the positive effects that they see, the ripple effects they see that happen as they start to look at things differently, because it's all about perspective change, right? So greed and selfishness, even in today's age, often equal isolation. And isolation just leads to that Scroogey, Grinchy nature, right? One of the most important lessons for me in these movies is the whole concept of the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. Because these, to me, symbolize self-reflection and growth. And we talk about that a lot here on Wellness Wednesday, and it's something that I've personally experienced a lot. Self-reflection, although sometimes it can be dangerous and it can turn into rumination if you're spending too much time looking at what's happened and trying to change it, or trying to figure out what you did. If you spend too much time back there in rumination, it lands you in depression, and that can be very dangerous, especially this time of year. But self-reflection and personal growth are crucial to change. They are crucial to becoming more compassionate and kind, and to having less greed and selfishness. So how do we do that? Well, self-reflection, we all have the choice. And I love that all of these movies teach this, that we all have the choice to be different if we take the time to reflect on ourselves and be honest with ourselves and try to change our actions. And sometimes I used the term fake it till you make it a little bit ago. And there's a lot of I see a lot of controversy on Facebook right now with that whole fake it till you make it phrase. There's some people that really don't like it. But it's been my experience that sometimes acting the way I want to be is what gets me there. If I want to be generous, sometimes I have to do things that I don't feel like doing. Or that maybe I don't think I can financially. You know, I've talked many times about paying for the person behind me in the drive-thru. But sometimes you have to do the things that you know are the right thing, until you start to get that feeling. Sometimes I do those things to make me feel better. It's selfish giving. I have a mentor that calls it selfish giving. And it's when you do it to make you feel better, or to try to change your perspective, versus doing it just to do it, or doing it to try to get something back out of it. And that can sound a lot like doing it to get something back out of it. But when we give, it's really about the reasoning behind why we give and the mindset with which we do it, right? So self-reflection and personal growth, that's something that takes a lot of work. And we're going to dig into that more in just a second because it's not something that happens overnight. And then the final message that I find in all three of these is that no matter how selfish or misguided or grinchy or Scroogey a person has been, it's never too late to make those choices to change. We see that in all three of these adaptations I'm talking about, you know, the more original Christmas Carol movies, Scrooged, Spirited. We see that no matter how selfish or misguided a person has been, it's not too late to change. Now, on that subject of self-reflection and personal growth and it not happening overnight, in the original Christmas Carol, we see more, Charles Dickens paints more of a drastic change. Like Scrooge goes through this experience overnight and then wakes up the next morning and everything's wonderful. He sees everything differently. It's just a very drastic change. But in those adaptations, Scrooge is also a very elderly man. In the more recent ones, like Scrooged and like Spirited, these tend to focus more on little changes at a time. And since I haven't ever watched any of the original Christmas carols, I can't speak to this. It's possible that we see those little changes in Scrooge also before the ghosts ever get to him. Kind of like in The Grinch and also in Scrooged and Spirited, where we start to see that deep down inside, these people are really good. They're just covering it up with a lot of really prickly, mean, Scroogey type attitudes because they are basically defending themselves. They are keeping themselves behind a wall because they've been hurt or because they've been traumatized. And so this is how they get around it. But no matter how selfish or misguided, it's not too late and they can make those changes. And that's what we see repeatedly over and over again in these movies. So additional themes of wellness that I found that were movie specific. So in the original Christmas Carol, there was some heavy symbolism going on. Jacob Marley, which was Scrooge's late boss, who tells him that the three ghosts are coming to visit. The original Jacob Marley in the story and in a lot of the movies is weighed down with chains. He's weighed down with regret. It's very heavy. So we talked about that, the rumination, the going back and looking at the things that you thought you should have done that you didn't, or the things that you think you missed out on. When you spend a lot of time in that rumination and in that regret, you are weighed down. And that's a lot of times what contributes to depression, especially if you ruminate more on that kind of thing over the holidays. So there's some heavy duty symbolism going on there with the weight and the chains and everything that Jacob Marley is carrying. And the fact that he tells Scrooge that he is basically walking around looking at all these other people in the spirit world who are weighed down by their regrets. And because of his focus in his life on self and greed and work, he is no more able to change things for them than he was when he was alive. And he's coming to Scrooge because this is his one opportunity to help someone change before they are also weighed down with that regret. The Ghost of Christmas Present, in the original Christmas Carol, is very heavy duty Christmas spirit themed. He looks like Santa Claus. He's got a torch that when he sprinkles on things, it changes the outlook. So again, very heavy duty symbolism, also in the meaning that the Christmas present is maybe a spirit and a feeling, not an actual physical gift. So I found the symbolism heavy duty in these original ones, which is not unusual for movies and stories made in that time. And then, of course, Lost Love. Again, like I said, there are several different adaptations of Christmas Carol, but they all frequently at least touch on a lost love of Scrooge's named Belle from earlier in his life. And then there's Scrooged. There were some very specific items that stood out in Scrooge that didn't necessarily relate to some of the other stories, which, two things that specifically stood out to me in this movie, with starring Bill Murray, was that Frank Cross said to Claire, after they'd been reunited because the ghost actually, if you've watched the movie, the ghost actually dials the phone after his first visit, and it ends up being her. It gets her voice message and he picks up the phone. And they hadn't talked in like 15 years. But there's one scene where the Ghost of Christmas Future takes Frank to two very well-dressed ladies having a very fancy lunch. And one of them is Claire. And this is what Claire looks like now, where she's telling the waiter or the server to make these children, these urchins, kind of go away, because her attitude has changed. Claire is a very giving, very sacrificing, very community-oriented, people-oriented person. And in this scene from the future, Claire is just like Frank. And it goes back to Frank saying to Claire, scrape them off. If you want to save someone, save yourself. And that's what turns Claire into the opposite of what Frank actually loved about her. And this is one of the final scenes that the Ghost of Christmas Future shows him, that I think makes a huge change on him, because he realizes that something he said, the way he acted, has had an effect on this woman he loved and changed her into something completely the opposite of what he loved about her to begin with, which was her goodness, which has him kind of rethinking everything. So this goes back to that self-reflection and personal growth. These ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, that's what they're doing. They're taking these Scrooges through basically a history and a future of their lifetime to show them what it could look like, what it does look like if they continue on their current path. And it forces that self-reflection and personal growth. The other thing that stood out to me in the Scrooged movie was the very end. And this is a direct quote where Frank says, now he has gone through his visits. He is now on the set. And the irony in this movie is that he is directing a show called The Christmas Carol. It's an adaptation. He's trying to sensationalize it, make it look showy. He's got the solid gold dancers, which cracked me the heck up. And at the end, he ends up on the set during filming. And he starts to talk, and he starts to talk on the camera, and he starts to talk about the things he should have done or the things that he wishes he'd done differently. And he addresses his brother and a special gift from his brother, and the way he's been acting. And he also addresses Claire. And one of the things he says, one of the final things he says, here we go. Sorry, guys, sometimes I get emotional, is it's Christmas Eve. It's the one night of the year when we all act a little nicer. We smile a little easier, and we cheer a little more. For a couple hours out of the whole year, we are the people that we always hoped we would be, which I thought was incredibly profound for an 80s comedy, basically. That was a very strong message at the end, but I found myself asking, and I will ask you, why only on Christmas Eve? Why only on Christmas Eve? I mean, if that's what it takes to get us there, okay. But why are we only the people we always hoped we could be on Christmas Eve or right around the Christmas season? Because of the Christmas spirit. Why can't we embody that every single day? Okay, so let's see if I can clean myself up here. And I'm going to wrap this up here shortly because I know your time is precious, but I really hope you're getting something out of this. So spirited items that stood out to me. So again, Spirited is a different animal. It's more of a sequel, a very modern day adaptation. And essentially what's happening is, like I said, Jacob Marley has started a business. So this is all from the perspective of the ghosts who are trying to do this same thing, Ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, that takes these influencers that are very, very negative through this trajectory, and they're trying to choose influencers who have the most impact so that their changes can have the most impact. And a heavy-duty theme in this movie is that they have this one, which is Ryan Reynolds' character, which is Clint Briggs, who is unredeemable. He's just too bad. He's too evil. He's too gross. He's too grinchy. And he is the Scrooge character, and he is unredeemable. And so the ghosts are being told by the ghost of Jacob Marley, who is their boss, that they can't work with him. They need to find somebody else because he is unredeemable. And we'll go back to that in a minute. So there's a couple of things that specifically stood out to me. So in this case, I don't recall in Spirited there being a clear Bob Cratchit character, but there is Clint's assistant, Kimberly, who's played by Octavia Spencer, I think is her name, from The Help, and she's fabulous. She's just fabulous. And she, in the process of doing things for Clint at Clint's request, is confronting her own compromised values. We saw this in Scrooged with Grace, who sent different Christmas presents than what Frank told her to send to certain members of his family, because he told her to send his brother a towel, and she was like, what? He's your brother. He's your only brother. So in the case of Kimberly, which is Clint's assistant, she has been tasked with finding dirt on a teenage child to destroy his life on social media. These are the kinds of things that she does as Clint's assistant, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. So she is, a lot of this movie, one of the underlying stories is that she is confronting her own compromised values. So I find that very interesting because you don't see that as much in the other adaptations and movies. So let's talk about Clint's nephew and the Christmas tree scene. So Clint is a social media guru. And in this adaptation, this sequel to Christmas Carol, social media is actually what is painted as the negative currency. So the other ones focus on money and success, where this is more of the evils of social media. So it is right in with the times and with the controversies we talk about today. Clint's nephew is running for a position in school, class president, class treasurer, something like that. And his brother, who reminds me, and I think I read somewhere that it was done on purpose. Clint's brother, the character that plays him, the gentleman that plays him, reminds me very much of Bobcat Goldthwait. And I believe I read somewhere that he kind of studied Bobcat Goldthwait's mannerisms and such, because there's a couple references in Spirited back to Scrooged and a couple other Christmas Carol movies. And this guy really did kind of embody Bobcat Goldthwait a little bit. And I kind of found it humorous. And that's what started my research, actually. So Clint's nephew is running for a class position, and Clint sends Kimberly, his assistant, to find dirt on the child that he's running against so that they can destroy him on social media. So very just unscrupulous, very evil bullying tactics. Good morning, Miss Erica. That have to do with social media. And then the major scene, and it is a musical, I will warn you, it's a musical, but as much as I'm not a fan of musicals, it's a musical unlike anything I've ever seen, and it's definitely worth watching. There's a big Christmas tree scene where they talk, basically the premise of this Christmas tree scene is how to sell more real trees, because real tree sales are down and artificial tree sales are up. So this turns into a massive social media marketing thing that makes people question their own existence if they don't have a real tree. And it kind of paints a picture of how easily people are swayed by what they see on social media, what they see on TV, what they see in any media, which is often not reality. So it goes back to this comparison, and it goes back to this not checking facts that we've talked about in the past. So this entire scene is built around taking these statistics and figuring out how to make people feel like less of a person or less Christmas spirited, or whatever the case may be. Like, if you don't have a real Christmas tree, you don't believe in Christmas, you don't believe in Santa, you don't believe in Jesus. I mean, all of these things. And it's all social media spin, which to me was a very stark picture of what we're dealing with on a daily basis in the media. So I won't dig into that too much because you guys know I try to stay away from the political angle on a lot of things. But I found that portion of the movie to be a very big eye-opener. Those portions of the movie about destroying this teenager's life on social media in the name of winning a class president campaign or whatever it was, and this Christmas tree scene to speak very starkly about what is sometimes a bigger deal than money in this day and age, and that we need to keep in mind that what we see on social media is not always the facts. It's often a twisting of the facts, and it's not always reality. And that goes back to some talk about comparison that we did a few weeks ago When we're comparing with other people on social media, a lot of times what we're seeing is their highlight reel, not reality. So keep that in mind. I thought that was a really strong message in this particular adaptation. Another huge one that I have in bold here because it was big, and I already kind of touched on this, was a quote where Clint says, maybe there's no quick fix. Maybe you got to put in the work. And I think it was Clint that said that. It might have been Will Ferrell's character, which I'm not going to say anything about because I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it. But those are really important words. Maybe there's no quick fix. Maybe you've got to put in the work. And this is said specifically to no one changes overnight. So again, the original Scrooge, big drastic change overnight, kind of an almost overnight change with the movie Scrooged with Bill Murray. But the truth of the matter is just like the reason that I come on here every week to share with you is that changing from a negative mindset, from anxiety and depression, things like that, selfishness, those are not things that you can just do overnight. They take work. And so you have to give yourself grace because you can make those changes, but it's not reasonable for anyone, especially you, to expect it to happen overnight, like is often depicted in these movies. And again, the final theme, the whole unredeemable thing from Spirited. It turns out that the unredeemable character was not really unredeemable, and that the ghost that pushes, and I'm going to be very vague here because if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to spoil it for you. The ghost that really pushes to go ahead and work on this unredeemable character for this year, it's because at one point in time, that individual, when alive, was termed by these ghosts as unredeemable. So again, proof that nobody is unredeemable. And anyone can change. And then one quote in particular I saw in terms of this movie was, can you overcome the worst parts of yourself to be a better version? And again, it's not going to be an overnight thing, but if you're reflecting, if you're doing self-reflection and self-growth, then you can find the little things about yourself that you don't like, that you maybe aren't proud of, and you can work on those parts to be a better version of yourself, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight. So this one's running a little long, so I'm going to wrap this up. I know there was a lot of information there because we were talking about essentially 3 different movies, although in general terms. So remember these final lessons from A Christmas Carol, the concept, the adaptations, the sequel, whatever, which is that bullies come in all forms and disguises. That is a quote. Actually, it's not a direct quote. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who she's the founder of the hospice movement. She's considered to be the founder of the hospice movement. She coined the 5 stages of death and dying, which is also oftentimes part of the 5 stages of recovery, which is anger, depression, denial, acceptance, and there's one more that I always forget, and I don't know why. I can't ever remember all 5 at the same time. But Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, and I quote, "Teachers come in all forms and disguises," which I have found to be true my whole life, especially more recently as my mindset and perspective started to change. Bullies come in all forms. We see in these movies and also in The Grinch from last week, the mayor in The Grinch and all of the Scrooges, they're all kind of bullies in some form or fashion, right? They're mean, they fire people, they use their power and their influence to make other people's lives miserable. They are bullies. But teachers also come in all forms and disguises. And in the case of these movies, those are they're ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. Yes, unredeemable. It's a very strong message, isn't it, Carla? It's just amazing. So teachers come in all forms and disguises. And those are, in these cases, the ghosts, the loved ones, and the children. In all of these movies, well, 2 out of these 3 movies, there is a small child in there that has a profound part. In The Grinch, there's Cindy Lou, and in the original Christmas Carol, there's Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim is even kind of mentioned in Scrooged. And then in Scrooged, there's this little boy named Calvin who hasn't spoken. He's basically the Tiny Tim of this movie. He hasn't spoken since he witnessed his father's death. And then I honestly have to go back to Spirited and watch it again to refresh my memory. But I know that the ghosts are major teachers in all of these movies. So remember these final lessons. Bullies come in all forms, but so do teachers. Not everything is as it seems. So comparison, again, we've talked about that, and we really, really see the implications of comparison and of the spin that social media can provide, or that news media, television, any of that can provide. We see it a little bit in Scrooge, but we really, really see it in Spirited. No one is unredeemable. We learned this from the Grinch. We learned this from the Christmas Carol movies. No one is unredeemable. I talked a little bit about a neighbor of mine last week. And you can see in all of these characters, like I said, I can't speak for Scrooge himself, but in all of these other characters, you can kind of see little hints throughout the movie that they're not the bad people that we think they are, that there's just something else going on that's got them putting up walls and blocks and chasing people away, doing things to keep people away. And that most importantly, Christmas should be every day, and that joy is contagious. And where we really saw this was in Scrooged at the end, because the more Frank Cross talked on the screen about the things he should have done and the way Christmas should be, the more all of the actors, all of the TV producers, everybody involved with the show, the more everybody just kind of kept gathering closer and closer and closer to him. And they are all partying, and they're all having a good time, and they're all exhibiting Christmas joy they couldn't find when they were surrounded by negativity, mostly from Frank. There's some awesome messages here. I hope you found something in them. I have a couple of different lists of how some of these movies are ranked, and Spirited is too new. It's actually not on any of them. But I do have some lists if you want to check out. I'll drop them in the comments so that you can check out how some of these movies, Christmas Carol adaptations, are ranked and what some of the descriptions are about them. But most importantly, I definitely encourage you to choose a version and watch it and see if you can find some of the messages that I found, or see if you can find new ones, and come back and tell me if you found something that I didn't touch on. Because I would like to know, because everybody looks at these things from a different perspective, right? So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful. This one was a little more complicated because of the movie I chose and how many different versions and adaptations there are of it. If you want to watch Spirited, as far as I know, it's still only streaming on Apple TV. You might be able to grab yourself a free trial so that you can check it out. Maybe find some clips on YouTube. The other ones you should be able to find in any form or fashion. I think we found Scrooged on Paramount Plus, which I'm doing a free trial on right now. And there's also a Christmas movie channel on Roku. So there may be lots of ways to find any variations of these movies. But yes, Carla, I will drop the links that have the ratings of the different Scrooge movies. And I'll report back to you, because I'm going to choose one of these older actual Christmas Carol, the ones that stick closer to the book. And I'm going to watch one of those too at some point before the Christmas season is over, because my interest in all of this has just been increased by talking about this and researching this. So next week, we are going to talk about another family-friendly movie. It is animated. That's all I'm going to tell you. I don't know a lot about it. It was on one of the lists of recommended movies that have wellness messages. Yes, there was a list I found. I'm hoping to watch it with my grandson, barring any unforeseen events. And I will talk about this one next week. This is going to be more family-friendly. And then our final one is going to be more of an adult movie. Not kid-friendly. But has some really great messages in it that are going to lead us into the last Wellness Wednesday of the year. So if you found this helpful, please share. I hope you have a fabulous Wednesday. I hope your Christmas season is becoming everything that you hope it will be, and that you found some important messages in our review on the Christmas Carol and its many adaptations and versions. If you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to share. I'm going to drop some links in the comments for you, and I'll see you next Wednesday. In the meantime, be well. Bye.